Hello and welcome to Property Mastermind Podcast, episode 152 with Hilary and Bob Anderson. Today we are talking when due diligence goes wrong. We will unpack a few case studies and you're going to learn a lot about what's required with due diligence and what can happen if you get stuck. So let's jump on into episode 152. Hello, welcome to episode 152. Crikey, we are streaming through these things, aren't we, Bob?
Yeah. Wow, it's about 3 years worth.
3 years worth, and I think we've missed 2 episodes in that time.
That's pretty good.
One was because my father passed away, and what was the other reason? I can't even remember.
Must have been a good excuse though.
Oh, yeah, I know. We're pretty solid on the podcast, pretty reliable.
Maybe
I
one
think.
of us is in deathbed in hospital or something to take that.
Yeah, well, neither of us have had that happen.
No,
And he's hoping,
wood.
touching some wood around the place. Okay, so talking when due diligence goes wrong, fabulous episode ahead for you today. But before we kick off, Bob, I've got a question that's going to freak you out. No, it's not actually. I changed my mind. I was going to come at you with if you were to gamble on something this weekend, what would it be? But I changed my mind because he's not a gambler. So I thought that would throw
not with
him.
my money.
No way.
I don't mind gambling a little with yours.
No, exactly. But I thought, let's have a chat about State of Origin last night. What the heck? Oh, so today's Thursday, what was it, 5th or something?
And that's probably about the 7th.
Well, actually, I'll have a look on my watch. It's the 6th. There you go.
There you go. In between what both of us thought.
It's Thursday the 6th. So last night was State of Origin. What about that hit on Reece?
It was a big hit.
Was a big hit.
That was I don't upset all our New South Wales fans, but
New South Wales.
It looked like he really lined him up, delivered.
Oh, crikey.
I was happy to see him get up though, because when he was on the ground, it looked like he was out. It's not a good look. It doesn't matter who does it, what side you follow. It's not a good look when a player's down there and really not moving after a big hit. So, unfortunate. Unfortunate. I mean, he should have maybe not done it.
Yeah, but at least he's not as injured as he could have been.
No, it could have been a lot worse. Yeah, it sort of makes your tummy sink a bit when you see any player, even on the side you're not backing, get hit like that and not move for a little while.
And it's so funny because here I am, Kiwi, full rugby supporter, but when it comes to State of Origin, I am a Queenslander. It's so bizarre. I actually turned into a Queenslander, and there's Bob and I watching it and sort of doing our little bit of bad language here and there. What the heck?
Yeah, it's not as much fun as when Australia play New Zealand and we're sitting beside each other on the couch, not talking to each other.
I get a bit more competitive than you, though. So I actually feel like I'm in the game, whereas you're like, oh, well, whatever.
No, I'm detached from the game. If I'm not playing, I'm not there.
Anyway, it was a great game, and that was number one. So it'd be interesting to watch number 2 being played in Melbourne, won't it?
In Melbourne, well, neutral ground. And New South Wales have to win that. They just have to win it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, even assuming they did, let's say they did, well, they're back in Queensland for the final, which is never an easy task, but they won before at Suncorp, so it's up to them now.
Is that next week? Is it 1 week apart?
Oh, it's a couple of weeks.
Couple of weeks apart.
I don't really know the dates, but always exciting.
Yes. Okay. Well,
our Victorian watchers probably didn't even know it was on a rugby league thing.
Oh yes, hello, people from Victoria. State of Origin was on last night. Well, Queensland beat New South Wales. There was a high hit early in the game, and they were played with one man down. So anyway, that's the summary.
That's it.
That's it, all in one. Let's talk about due diligence, Bob, when due diligence goes wrong. Oh, before we do, giving away the book, Property Millionaires Exposed. Now, for those, I hold this up often and you probably think, oh, yes, it's where a lot of people that are property professionals or have paid to be property professionals, which can happen in some cases, and they write, they've written a paragraph about what they believe is the reason that they make money from property development.
Well, from their particular strategy. I'm the only developer in there, but
there's renovators and there's all sorts of people.
All sorts of people in there.
So it is a great read because it's got a mixture, and it doesn't matter what your opinion is in life. It's always good to understand as much as we can and be open to hearing new things. And it's a great read. Obviously, Bob thinks 121 is the place to start.
Page 121. That's where you need to start that book, not at the front.
Yeah, and then work your way around whatever chapter whose face
what
you
do
like.
After that one.
There's a lovely blonde chick at the bottom. She's quite attractive. Look at hers.
Yeah, well, we either read after you've read my bit, read Joe's.
Oh, Joe Vidello.
Yeah.
Big plug for Joe Vidello.
And who's on the back?
We've got Bernadette Jansen.
Bernadette's there as well. Good friends of ours.
There you go.
There you go.
So we are giving this one to Paulo Manuel. Paulo, books in the post. We've had a few chats with you this week. Great guy. So we are looking forward to see your property journey roll out. So this will be in the post for you. But anyway, Bob, let's talk
Due diligence.
I think what I want you to just briefly, not even briefly, just explain what due diligence is.
Well, it's a term that's used not just in property development. I mean, you could be looking at buying some shares and you do due diligence. So what it is, it's really checking out a range of aspects to see if the thing is worthy of your investment. In property development, it's not exclusively, but a lot of it is directed to the site itself.
Yes.
And there's a whole range of things that we need to look at. In fact, we produce a due diligence checklist in our course that where you can sort of work your way through and tick all these things off. It's just to make sure that there's no issues, or at least to understand what the issues are. Can they be overcome?
I think that's a good point. Understand what they are and can they be overcome?
Yeah, because you often don't find a perfect site.
No.
I suppose you might. I used to make the comment, I did all the easy ones in the 80s. Now we're getting down to the harder ones. But that's partly true. But
I thought you were actually going to take it to relationships then, and I thought, oh, here we go. What are you going to say there? Well, when you said in fact, and you gave me a cheeky look, I thought, oh, here's he go. I'll kick him under the table. All the
easy ones. There's never an easy relationship.
Well, can of worms we're opening up this morning,
right.
Bob.
Joking. Yeah, so understanding, what are the issues to look out for? What do we need to check on? If there are some, can we overcome them? And there's a lot of things to look at. If you don't, you could end up in trouble. Just one missed, aspect of due diligence, and we'll probably talk about it. You talked about some case studies a moment ago.
Yeah.
It can be just one thing that can sink the ship.
Yeah. I think at the end of that, I've got a question I want to ask now, but I'll hold off until the end because I think it's probably more important that we get through these case studies and just talk through what was missed, and then we might find a pattern perhaps or not. But before we do, you did touch on it, due diligence. I love you see the aspects of that. You used that word. I thought, I've never heard you use that. I liked it.
I was struggling for a word and it came out.
Okay, well done. But it needs to be done on the site. It needs to be done on the builder that you're going to be using. It needs to be done on your consultants. And in this day and age, more than ever, it actually needs to be done on your educators. With AI being able to produce content creators that you can pretty much create something on anything you know nothing about by just using AI to do it for you. So, that's another thing. I think that, and that's not just property development. I think that AI is opening a world of non-professional people or non-experienced people being able to put themselves forward as an experienced person. So if you are looking into anything, I would definitely be doing due diligence on that as well, and not just reading somebody's reviews, really looking into those, because it's also easy to write bogus reviews, as we've found out.
Yeah. I mean, Google is the big thing to go to, AI now, but it won't solve issues. It's like problems necessarily, unless you give it a specific problem, then I don't know if it can really solve it. But if you don't know what problem to look for, you probably won't find one for you. So with AI and Google, you can get a lot of information, but it won't solve problems. Or it doesn't, it doesn't know the problems to solve. Now, maybe if you knew the problem and you're looking for a solution, maybe it can help. But that's the point. There's a lot of things to look out for in your due diligence. There's things that can happen that just pertain to your project, not the one down the road. And if you don't know, then you don't know where to look. And it's not just going to pop up online.
And you've got to remember that with, while we're just talking artificial intelligence, if you're asking AI to look for something, it's crawling the web. How many people write a blog about something who have no authority, no experience? It's looking through that information as well. So you've just got to be careful that it's cited. There's a lot of things that need to be done. Anyway, so we're talking due diligence.
Yeah, it's turned into an AI.
I know. Right now I don't think it's clear, it's tidy enough. But while we're on that, Bob, I can just drop in here. We do have a free masterclass coming up on the 22nd of June from 9 till 1. And that's where Bob, I've been around your relatives too often because they call you Rob. So they take you Bob will take you through the process of property development every step of the way and just tell you how it maps out, and it's a great way to we give incredible value on that, and that is always the feedback. It's free, which is great, but it shows you the process that you need to understand, because if you think about, if you're new to property development, and people will even come on it that are doing property development, so it's not sort of just for absolute newbies, but it is great for newbies because it gets your mind just realizing what's involved and the process that you'll be going through. So anyway, let's carry on with the due diligence, but that is the 22nd of June from 9 till 1. There'll be a link below for you to register, and let's move on, Bob. So let's talk about, let's start with a case study. And the one I want to start with was the guy. I know we've touched on it before in another podcast, but I think it's really vital. As the guy with the mining subsidence.
Yeah,
it's such a classic.
Yeah, sad one.
It is sad.
I got to like the guy. So when we talk about mining subsidence, we're really just talking about areas where there's mining, particularly coal mining. So we're talking about places like Ipswich near Brisbane, the Hunter Valley, Newcastle around there, and I think there's parts of South Australia as well where there's mining. And what happens is certain areas in those mining precincts can subside. The ground can subside over time, and how much it subsides has a lot to do with the mines underneath, where they are, how large they are, what directions they go, how deep they are, whether they're full of water or not. There's a lot of variables, and you need to get a mining subsidence report. Now, I know some parts of near Newcastle, a lot of reports have been done on certain areas. So the council says, okay, well, that particular area, it's this. But in lots of parts of Australia, you actually have to get a specialist engineer to do a mining subsidence report. And they look at the mining maps where, a whole heap of things and run calculations, and they come up with what the subsidence, in other words, how much the ground could sink at the surface. Over time, and that can have a big effect on your development.
What do they cost, Bob, to get a mining subsidence
I haven't had
report?
one done for years. I'm thinking, probably, I don't know, $3,000, $4,000 perhaps.
Okay.
But
don't hold him to it.
Don't hold me to it.
He's thinking it's around that.
Yeah, well, I haven't done one for a while. This particular person was acquiring a site to do 5 townhouses and ordered a mining subsidence report, but the engineers who were doing it were rather slow. It came to a point where he had to go unconditional on his contract, exchange the contract, but he hadn't received a report back. He did get a small extension of 7 days, but he still didn't get the report back.
He must have been so frustrated.
So he's sitting on a knife edge. Does he pull out of the deal because he still doesn't have the report? Or does he go ahead in the expectation that the report will be okay? And he did talk to the engineers on the phone. They hadn't completed it, but they said, we think it'll be okay. Well, that was the worst thing that ever happened because he went unconditional.
Oh, my goodness. We think it'll be okay.
Yeah. He didn't even get the report back before settlement. That's how slow they were. I think they wanted to check it 3 times because it came up bad. So he's bought a site. The mining subsidence was of such a level that you couldn't build on it. And that can happen. And so he's left with a property with an old house on it where he's bought a development site you can't develop.
Is there anything you can do with that, Bob, or you just knock it down and graze cattle?
Well, you're stuck with the house. I mean, the house was built a long time ago. They wouldn't have needed a mining subsidence report back in those days. But to do a development, part of the development permit, you would. And that's when I've had to get mining subsidence reports occasionally because, we live in Queensland. I've done a few things at Ipswich where I needed mining subsidence reports, but always made sure it's part of the due diligence. And I never acquired the site or even went unconditional until I knew the results of it.
So the lesson there, Bob, is I think the biggest lesson that I hear in there, the consultant said it's likely to be okay, but he hadn't signed anything. No. So that means absolutely nothing.
No, it's still working
until you get that absolute report back.
Signed report.
Yeah, you do
until
not.
You got that, you got nothing.
No.
And so anything else is very risky. And, some people, well, they've got different risk levels. If you take the risk, I'm going to go ahead anyway, I think it'll be okay. That is a big risk.
Yes.
And, but, unfortunately, it backfired.
Would you have gone ahead with it, knowing the story? No.
There's too much at risk.
Do you know what he ended up doing with that site?
I think just eventually sold it as a house on a block of land and lost money.
So the next one, Bob, I want to talk about. So Bob and I have discussed this morning. We were having our morning coffee, and he had a plethora, which I love that word.
Plethora.
I put it in both podcasts, so my own one
I love
and
that
this
word.
one.
It's one of your words.
I don't know where I got it, but it's great. So he had a plethora of examples, and I chose the ones that I was like, oh, let's use that one, and let's use that one. I want you to talk about the one with the real estate agent.
Oh, that was one of mine.
Yes, one of yours.
So it goes back probably, I think it was the early 90s, let's say 1991. I was looking for a site, this is in Brisbane, to do some townhouses. A site came up in a good suburb, probably about 3 k's from the CBD, in a good area. And it was large enough. I think it was about 800 metres that at the time I could do 4 townhouses on. It's just what I wanted to do in that area.
You're like, yay.
Yay.
I've got everything I want.
So I got on the agent, met the agent on site and had a look. Now, there was a house on it. It had quite a lot of white ants. I mean, you didn't even need to get an inspection. I could see the white ants, but I didn't care because they're going to demolish it and build 4 new townhouses. So I said, look, really interested. I'll get back to you this afternoon. I went back to the office and I jumped on the council website to check the flood because, you can check the floods. Lo and behold, and it was 1.8 metres under. That's how far it can go in a flood.
Holy
so 6
heck.
foot underwater. And the reason I did that is because it's not far from the river and I know that area has a lot of floods.
And was this before the days where you could actually log onto the council website and see the flood?
No, you could do it even then.
Oh, my goodness, yeah.
Yeah, it's very early days. So I thought, well, no, that's not going to work. And I checked with my planner, but I knew, if it floods, you can't fill the site. Besides which, there was houses both sides of it that would also flood and behind it and all around it. So I rang the agent and I said, look, I can't buy that site. It floods. It goes 1.8 metres under. And he said, oh, that's okay. I said, so are you going to keep trying? I just felt she was going to keep trying to sell it. I said, are you going to leave it on the market or are you going to take it off? She said, no, I'll leave it on the market. I said, buyer beware. Wouldn't believe it. I was passing there about 2 weeks later. There's a sold sign on it. So it had the real estate agent sign and sold. And I thought,
to a wood duck.
So I followed it because it was in an area I often drove past, maybe every couple of months. So about all those years later, guess what?
It's
vacant.
It's still vacant
because the house came down because it was full of white ants. You couldn't even live in it. But then you couldn't replace it. You couldn't even build a new house. So vacant block of land. What do you do with it? It's worth nothing. In fact, since then, because this is a long time ago, I think the council has acquired a number of properties along that street that you really can't build on. The houses are really old and they've just turned it into like local parkland. A park with some swings and stuff for kids and dogs. And
would they at least have given a decent price for the money, council? Would they have paid a good price to do that, or not really?
Market value, and what is market value really? Knowing that you can't develop it, and knowing that these are just old houses on a block of land you can't develop, that would have had value for sure. But not the value they'd have as a site.
And you've also got to think of how long did they have to hold it before the council bought it off them.
Well, they can just step in and buy them.
Yeah, but I mean, that person had holding costs who purchased that. Yeah.
Yeah, some people may live there, some have an investment. But anyway, that's where it is. You can drive past there anytime.
It's still there.
And it's a little park now. I think they must have bought up about 6 houses.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the lesson on that one is, well, the agent, and it's not actually the real estate agent's responsibility to produce any report.
It is if they knew it flooded.
Oh, so it was because you brought it to her
I
attention.
don't know if she knew that it flooded.
But you told her that it did.
Oh, after that she did.
But then she still sold it.
With the next person, yeah. And I don't know how any of that played out with the purchaser.
Goodness.
As to whether they could, they had a shot at the agent or not. Should have had a shot at her.
Yeah.
Because I think of the way it works, if an agent knows there's an issue like that, then they're bound to tell you. But I don't think, I'll stand corrected on that because I'm not 100% sure. It could be that if you said to them, does it flood?
Right.
And they know it floods, they have to say yes. Or it could be if they know it floods, supposed to tell you, not sure. But anyway, whatever it is, don't just rely on the real estate agent. Do your own due diligence.
You have to do your own due diligence.
And I knew that area generally, that suburb does flood a bit.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing I looked at.
Yes.
The zoning was right, the size was right, location was great, enough to get me excited to go and look at it.
Mm.
But the same day I looked at it, I killed it.
And before we jump on to the next case study, Bob, you just brought up the zoning, and I think that's probably going to be a next podcast. But zonings can change, and doing your due diligence, finding out if you're on the cusp of something changing. I recently spoke to my brother in New Zealand, and he bought a parcel of land just outside of a city, and he was able to subdivide it into several lots. He purchased it probably a week before the law was about to change. And he just went into the council and was lucky enough, because he's a lucky person, to get his done on, apparently he said, I was the last person to do it on the last day, and I only went in and organised it, where there had been a list of people way prior to him that didn't get theirs through. But there was a zoning change, so people that you can just miss out sometimes. And he wasn't a squeaky wheel. He was just Johnny on the spot and lucky enough to be in there and get it stamped done. He was like, I couldn't believe my luck. And he's off blooming.
Sounds like New Zealand, that something could happen that fast.
Yeah, well, yes, absolutely. It can. But okay, so Bob, the next one is the big sites. When you were working for a very large, well-known company in Australia doing developments, you gave me a great example of that this morning around stormwater.
Yeah.
Unpack that one.
Yeah, so the company I work for, head office was in the southern parts of Australia, but they bought a site on the outskirts of Brisbane to do a 400-lot subdivision. And it's about that time that I joined the company. And the reason they made a job open for somebody who nationally would acquire sites. That was me. Acquire them, do the due diligence, crunch the numbers, take the deal to the board, get it over, and then the company would buy it. And then we put a project manager on to run it. So that was how it worked. No sooner had I joined, and they just acquired a 400-lot subdivision. And so they said, just, check it out, get yourself settled in. It was about the first week I arrived at this job. And so I'm having a look, and one of the first things you look at, of course, is particularly something that large, like where's the stormwater go? And I got the report out, and there it is. It had a plan of the stormwater pipe coming from the site, heading off down the street, and they said, that's how we get rid of our stormwater. But what they hadn't done is looked at the capacity of the pipe
for 400 lots.
Well, it didn't. Yeah, that pipe probably might have taken 150 or 200 because it was a hill, and then the others go in a different direction. So you got different catchments on something that big. And so I checked the size with the council. It wasn't a big pipe. It was like, I can't remember. Maybe I was bigger than a 225, but it might have been a 450. But I would have thought it'd be bigger than that.
For the newbie property developers, you have no idea. He's talking about
the size, the diameter of a pipe.
The diameter, yes.
And so I got a civil engineer here to do some work on it, calculate the flows off the catchment and everything. He said, no, that pipe's not going to cope. And so as it ended up, we had to build what they call an augmented pipe. An augmented means beside the existing one. So you've got these existing pipe that won't cope with the water. So you build another pipe beside it.
And they still keep both going, Bob, or they cut one off? Okay,
yeah. Well, if you cut one off, you'd have to build an even bigger pipe. So there you go. And so it went back a kilometre. So we had to build another pipe down the road. Like this is, either through the road, across the road, down the footpath, wherever the pipe happened to be.
Sounds expensive.
And build another one beside it. So the stormwater then could discharge through two pipes. The existing one that was too small plus another one that topped it up. That cost a lot of money. And all that had to be done prior to really building it, and getting any money back. And so that was a pretty large development company. They were the second largest residential developer in Australia at the time. So of some size, some note. But the person who did the due diligence on it happened to be in another state at head office, which is okay. I mean, you can do, but didn't do a great job.
And luckily you stepped in.
Yeah. And so they didn't have an acquisitions expert. The person that looked at it was some sort of engineering. No, he wasn't an engineer. Some project manager or something from down south. Didn't look at it properly. Just said, "Oh, there's the pipe. That's great." Didn't look at the capacity. So even in big companies,
did half due diligence.
Yeah, and so that cost a lot of money, and it cost a lot of money up front before you could even get any money back in. And that made me think, well, here's little old me. who, before I went and worked for that company, was a sole operator, small developer, and I picked that up and they didn't. And so, yeah.
But didn't you say while you were doing that due diligence?
Well, while I worked for that company, my role, part of my was to find
Oh,
deals.
is this a different site, the one we were talking about where you got pipped at the post?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Okay, we're on to another one. Yeah,
Well, will I bother with that one? Or
no,
not?
it's good. It's a good story.
So while I was working at that company, I was out looking for development sites, and I came across a reasonable size one, not far from this one.
How many?
Oh, well, I can't remember.
Okay.
But it probably would have taken 100 lots maybe.
Yep.
And I started to do the due diligence on it because it was fairly low lying, but it was almost in a little bit of a spoon. Like if you looked at the roads around, the roads were sort of higher than the land, and it wasn't far from a river. And so the issue once again was stormwater, plus other services as well. You know, the capacities of the town water to cope and different things. So while I was doing my due diligence with the civil engineer that we often use, we're both trying to work out how to get the water off the block because you'd have to make the stormwater flow uphill. And can you fill it? Can you not fill it? And we're going through all this due diligence when a big company, who happened to be the biggest residential developer,
the one up,
the one up from us, just swooped in and bought it.
Oh.
And I knew their acquisitions guy because he used to work for me under me in another life. And I rang him up and I said, "You guys just grabbed that block?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "We were looking at that." And he said, "Oh, bad luck, sorry about that." And I said, "Well, don't be sorry because we haven't solved the issues on that yet." And I mentioned some of the issues to him. He said, "Oh, yeah, okay, And
turns out
he didn't talk to me for a little while. 3 months later, because they settled on it for millions. 3 months later, it's back on the market. And obviously it was on the market because they couldn't solve the issues. In fact, once again, you can drive past that block. I'll point it out one day when we're driving from the Sunshine Coast to Brisbane because you drive past it almost. Still there. Still there 23 years later.
Yeah.
You can't do it.
So, Bob, when we're talking, we've just given examples of stormwater, flooding, mining subsidence, and there was another one in there. I think there was two perhaps. You didn't tell us what the problem was on the other one. But I suppose the lessons we can learn from due diligence are never assume, Never assume that something will be okay. You can't assume.
And sometimes you can even get information from the seller and about different things. I always check that out.
Well, that was another case study we were going to talk about where we knew somebody who had purchased a site, just a normal 1 into 3 it may have been, and the same thing, the seller gave him the information that said that it was okay, that the zoning was okay, and he never double checked it and it wasn't okay. So that is a never assume, or it's not trust, because we can't know that person, that the seller didn't realise that there'd been a change. But you just have to do your own due diligence.
Yeah.
Not everyone's evil, like potentially that real estate agent, which I'm surprised it was a female, because you never said
why would you be surprised?
You never said the sex of it when we talked about it this morning. You never said she until we're in the podcast, and I'm like, oh, it's a she. Oh, I actually straight away thought it was a him. Another one, Bob, environmental checks are crucial, aren't they?
They can be on larger sites.
Yeah.
Probably not your little splitters and 3 or 4 townhouses because they're in a built-up area. But, environmental, when you get out on the outskirts can be.
Yeah. In fact, I had a chat with one of our mentoring students yesterday, which this has just sparked me a little thought with him. I might give him a call after this recording because that's probably something that he might have to double check on. Another one is the detailed feasibility. And that is, when it comes to feasibilities, there's podcasts on this, and maybe we're due to do another one because people don't always listen in order and it's hit and miss, and the title might not have grabbed your attention. But it is so important that you understand what goes into feasibilities, isn't it? And that is part of due diligence.
It is. It's the last part. Because once you've looked at particularly the site, you understand. I mean, it might be a really good, clean site with no issues at all. That's great. But it might be something that there's things along the way you have to deal with. They might cost you some money. And so when you do your feasibility, you need to know the results of that due diligence before you can really do your numbers.
Because at the start you said you need to understand that the potential problems that are on a site doesn't mean they stop the development. It just
No.
means that you've got to find ways to fix them, and they could be costly or they could be not costly. But it's just finding out those things.
So here's a quick example. Let's say you're looking at a site to do some townhouses. The block slopes gently down from the road. You have to get your stormwater and your sewerage back up to the street where the pipe is, and it's not going to flow uphill by itself. So one way you could do is to run a retaining wall around the boundary and fill the lot so that it slopes back to the road. Now, if it's a very mild slope and you're doing 4 townhouses, yeah, it costs something, but it's not like sheep stations. And if you're buying it right and it's a good deal, you can afford to do that. And during your due diligence, you would have discovered that in order to get the stormwater and the sewer to flow back to, I've got to fill it. And so you get quotes on building the retaining wall and the fill, and you put that into your feasibility.
Yeah.
And so you have to have done your due diligence first before you do your numbers, because there might be some cost factors that come up in your due diligence, like that example I gave you, that are going to affect the numbers. So, but property development, as we keep saying, it's just about numbers. It has to show enough profit to be worth the risk of doing it.
And I'm just going to reiterate on that for people who don't always understand. Just because you might think it makes $50,000, it's about being able to get finance. And a valuer isn't going to evaluate at the amount that's required for a financier to finance it if it doesn't reach a certain, what we call margin or a percentage of profit. And that's something that a lot of people don't necessarily understand. Me in the beginning, I'm like, well, it makes money. Why would you not do it? Then I understand, well, because the financier isn't going to loan you any money to get that done.
And that's a good form of due diligence in itself.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've done your due diligence properly, you've acquired the site, you've got your approval and so forth. But the valuer, as far as the financier is concerned, the valuer will decide for them if this project makes sufficient profit, for instance. And so to even get your finance, there's another level of due diligence sort of out of your control. So if the financier says it's a deal, it's a deal.
Yeah.
You know, but I mean, you wouldn't have gotten that far if you didn't believe it was a deal anyway, if you hadn't done your numbers. But you've got to do your numbers right.
Because your numbers will include those things like having to top the land up and looking at all the things that need to be done. We do have a fabulous feasibility calculator with a tutorial as well. So that is available. You're welcome to reach out for that. And the next one is time is your friend. And often get it out, Hilary, use your words. Often we have to jump because a site comes up and we don't have time to waste. So that's why it is vital that we always talk about knowing your patch, because you'll know that it's likely that, you know, where problems are going to be and what needs to be checked fast, won't you?
Yeah, and the beautiful thing is these days we've got access to so many, I'll call them programs, just for want of a better term, that can help us with our due diligence.
Yeah.
Back in my early days, I had to, drive to the council, drag out,
ride your horse and cart to the council, Bob.
Gallop to the council, and pull out all these maps. I mean, just to know what zoning a lot was.
Yeah.
I had to go to the council, pull out the zoning maps, and find it. Oh, it's that zoning. Whereas now, because bingo, just 10 seconds on the laptop, you know what the zoning is. Could be off the council website. It could be off, other things, national property data, all those RP data, all those things that
platforms that people use.
Some of which you pay for, some of which are free. Before you dig Australia, free. There's just so much due diligence that you can do from the comfort of your chair with your laptop these days, and that can be done fast.
And sometimes you have to pay for some of it, and that's okay, because that pay at the end, those payments you make are cheap in comparison
and
with
deductible.
getting and deductible in comparison with getting it wrong. So thanks, Bob. I think in conclusion, we've really talked about when due diligence goes wrong, and we've covered off a few types, and there are, I'm going to say it again, a plethora of things that you must.
I've got a vault full.
Oh, a vault full.
A vault full of things I've seen over the years, in my 40 years, of things that can go wrong with bad due diligence.
Yeah. So and also in our course, we've got the everything that you need to be looking at. So.
Oh, yeah. Well, we've got 23 case studies for a start of real projects. So you learn a lot from that.
Yes. Anyway, so we've got to learn not to jump in. We've got to learn to do the due diligence properly, to crunch the numbers properly. I've had a bit of a problem with my words this morning. Anyway, Bob, I think that was really interesting. It's been great to have a chat. We haven't had a podcast chat for a few weeks.
Had some interviews going.
Yeah, we had just a few other things, and I think we'd pre-recorded a couple.
We did pre-record a few.
So it's good to be sitting back in the saddle.
I love it.
Okay, well, see you all next week. We won't have any state of origin talk, but we'll do a catch up on that for the week after. But I think next week we possibly will talk zoning, maybe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's time.
All right.
All righty. Okay, thanks for everybody for listening. Share this with a friend who you think may be interested. And remember, we've got that free masterclass 22nd of June. There'll be a link to register below. Otherwise, happy property developing, and we'll catch you next week.
See you now.
Bye.